Elon Musk boarded a crowded train in downtown Los Angeles, dressed in a simple hoodie and dark sunglasses. He looked like any other passenger, blending into the sea of faces. The world knew him as a billionaire and inventor, but today he wanted to observe something far simpler: human kindness. Elon was always curious about people and their actions when no one was watching. This train ride wasn't just about getting from one place to another. For him, it was an experiment. As the train began to move, Elon's eyes darted around. He saw people from all walks of life. A businessman in a suit scrolled through his phone, oblivious to the world around him. A group of teenagers laughed loudly, sharing videos and jokes. A middle-aged woman sitting near the door had her eyes closed, pretending to be asleep, probably to avoid conversation or interaction. The train hummed with the sounds of chatter, beeping phones, and the occasional rattle of the tracks. Just as Elon settled into his seat, the train stopped at the next station. The doors opened, and a heavily pregnant woman stepped inside. She looked tired and uneasy, holding onto her belly with one hand and gripping her bag with the other. Her eyes searched the car for an empty seat, but every spot was taken. She stood near the door, gripping the pole for balance as the train jerked forward again. Elon leaned back slightly, watching the scene unfold. Surely someone would notice her discomfort, he thought. She wasn't hard to miss. Her swollen belly was a clear sign that she needed help. But as he glanced around, he saw that no one was paying attention. The businessmen kept scrolling. The teenagers continued their banter, and the woman pretending to sleep stayed still, not even peeking. The pregnant woman held on tightly as the train swayed, her face showing signs of strain. Elon felt a small pang of guilt as he stayed seated, but he reminded himself that this was part of the experiment. If he stepped in, it would ruin the chance to see if anyone else would act out of kindness. He wondered how long it would take, or if anyone would help at all. Time seemed to move slowly as the train continued on its route. The woman adjusted her bag, shifting her weight from one foot to another. She didn't say a word, but her discomfort was clear. Elon studied the faces around him, hoping to see someone look up, notice her, and do the right thing. For now, the train was a quiet stage, and the actors were unaware they were part of a much bigger story. Elon stayed in his seat, waiting, his heart heavy with both curiosity and concern. Would someone step up, or would this moment pass, unnoticed and ignored? The next few moments would reveal a lot, not just about the passengers on this train, but about people in general. Elon's experiment had begun. Elon kept his focus on the people around him, curious about their reactions. The pregnant woman, still standing by the door, looked exhausted. She swayed slightly with the movement of the train, gripping the pole tightly to steady herself. The other passengers carried on as though she didn't exist. It amazed Elon how easily people could tune out something happening right in front of them. The businessman sitting nearby seemed lost in his own world, scrolling through his phone as if it held the secrets of the universe. His face never lifted, not even for a second. Across from him, a group of teenagers laughed loudly, showing each other funny videos on their phones. Their laughter echoed in the crowded car, carefree and oblivious to the struggle a few feet away. Elon glanced at the middle-aged woman sitting closest to the pregnant woman. She had her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. He had seen this behavior before, people faking sleep or looking away to avoid any responsibility. It wasn't malicious, perhaps it was just a defense mechanism. But today, it felt colder than usual. The pregnant woman didn't ask for help. She didn't say a word. She simply stood there, her eyes scanning the car every now and then, as if silently hoping someone might notice her discomfort. Elon could see the strain in her face, her body clearly tired from the weight she was carrying. He shifted in his seat, tempted to step in, but he stopped himself. This was the whole point of his experiment. Would someone show kindness without being prompted? He leaned back, blending into the crowd as he continued to observe. The train lurched again, causing the woman to stumble slightly. She regained her balance quickly, but Elon noticed the flash of panic in her eyes. A couple sitting nearby glanced at her but quickly looked away, as if unsure of what to do. Elon frowned. He wondered if people weren't helping because they were genuinely distracted or because they assumed someone else would step in. Minutes passed, and nothing changed. The woman remained standing, her grip on the pole growing tighter. Elon scanned the car again, his frustration building. Was this what society had come to? A room full of people too busy with their own lives to notice someone in need. Just then, he noticed something. A young boy, sitting a few seats away with his mother, was staring at the pregnant woman. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. The mother looked up, her face thoughtful as she glanced at the woman. Elon's interest peaked. Would they act? He could feel his heartbeat quicken as he watched the small interaction unfold. The mother hesitated for a moment, then stood up, offering her seat to the pregnant woman. The woman's face lit up with gratitude. She carefully made her way to the seat, thanking the mother softly as she sat down. The boy smiled, proud of his role in making the moment happen. Elon leaned back, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Finally, a spark of kindness. The pregnant woman sat down with a sigh of relief, holding her belly and leaning back into the seat. She smiled warmly at the mother who had offered her the spot. "Thank you so much," she said softly. The woman nodded, brushing it off as though it was nothing, but her son's grin gave away how proud he was of their small act of kindness. Elon watched the scene with quiet satisfaction, but his eyes stayed alert. This was the moment he had been waiting for. One act of kindness often had the power to inspire others. Would this spark something bigger? The train rattled on, and for a moment, everything seemed the same. The businessman continued scrolling. The teenagers laughed louder, and the woman who had pretended to sleep finally opened her eyes, only to glance at her watch. It felt as though nothing much had changed. But then, a man sitting across from the pregnant woman leaned forward. He was in his late 30s, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He smiled at the woman and gestured to her bag. "Do you need help with that?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, thank you. It's a bit heavy." The man stood up, lifting her bag and placing it on the luggage rack above her seat. "There you go," he said, smiling warmly. "Thank you," the woman said again, her voice full of appreciation. Elon noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was like a ripple effect. The mother's simple gesture had opened a door, making others more aware of the pregnant woman's presence and her needs. From the corner of his eye, Elon saw one of the teenagers nudge her friend. After a quick exchange of whispers, she stood up and approached the pregnant woman. "Would you like some water?" she asked, holding out a half-full bottle. The woman blinked in surprise. "Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you," she said, taking the bottle and drinking a few sips. The teenager returned to her group, looking a little shy but also pleased. Her friends gave her encouraging smiles, and one of them said something that made them all laugh again. This time, though, their laughter felt less disruptive and more lighthearted. Elon leaned back, a quiet smile spreading across his face. The train car felt different now. The pregnant woman, who had looked so isolated when she first boarded, was now surrounded by small acts of kindness. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was enough to remind him of something important. People often needed a little nudge to notice what was happening around them. As the train continued its journey, Elon couldn't help but wonder what other changes these small gestures might inspire. He glanced at the young boy, who was now playing with his mother's phone, oblivious to the impact of his actions. It was a small moment, but it carried a powerful lesson. Sometimes, all it took to make the world a little better was one person willing to care. As the train moved along, the mood in the car had softened. What had once been a cold, disconnected space now felt warmer, more human. The pregnant woman sat comfortably, sipping from the bottle of water the teenager had offered her. She looked more at ease now, her earlier strain replaced by a small, grateful smile. Elon couldn't help but feel hopeful as he continued to watch. He noticed the changes around him. The businessman who had been glued to his phone finally glanced up. At first, he seemed slightly puzzled, as if wondering why the atmosphere felt different. His eyes lingered on the pregnant woman, and then they shifted to the young boy sitting beside his mother. The boy noticed the businessman looking and smiled shyly. Something about the exchange seemed to soften the man's expression. The train jerked slightly as it approached another station. A few passengers got off, and more climbed aboard, filling the car once again. Among the new passengers was an older woman carrying several heavy grocery bags. She looked around, trying to find a spot to put them down, but the train was too crowded. The man who had helped the pregnant woman earlier noticed her struggle. Without hesitation, he stood up and reached for one of her bags. "Let me help you with that," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Oh, thank you," the older woman replied, surprised by the gesture. He lifted her bags and set them down in a safer spot, out of the way of other passengers. Elon observed this new act of kindness, his interest growing. It seemed that once one person took the lead, it inspired others to do the same. The kindness was spreading like ripples in a pond, each act encouraging the next. Nearby, one of the teenagers nudged her friend again. This time, the two of them stood up and started to rearrange their seats, making more room for the older woman and her groceries. They didn't say much, but their actions spoke louder than words. The older woman smiled, clearly touched by the effort. "You girls are so thoughtful," she said. The teenagers shrugged, pretending it wasn't a big deal, but their smiles gave away their pride. Elon chuckled softly to himself. It was fascinating to see how quickly the energy in the car had changed. Even the woman who had been pretending to sleep seemed more alert now. She glanced around, her expression thoughtful, as if she was reconsidering her earlier decision to stay uninvolved. She shifted in her seat, making room for a passenger who was struggling to hold onto their bag. Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The experiment was proving what he had hoped. People weren't inherently uncaring. Sometimes, they just needed a little reminder that their actions, no matter how small, could make a difference. The train slowed as it approached another stop, and Elon leaned back, his eyes still scanning the car. He wondered how far this wave of kindness would go, and whether these passengers would carry it with them beyond this single train ride. The train slowed again, screeching to a stop at the next station. More passengers shuffled in, squeezing into the already crowded car. The pregnant woman sat quietly, still holding the water bottle given to her. Her shoulders looked less tense, and a faint smile lingered on her face. Elon watched as the older woman with the groceries settled into her spot, occasionally glancing at the man who had helped her. She caught his eye and gave him a warm nod of thanks. Across the car, the young boy who had first noticed the pregnant woman was now leaning into his mother, playing with her phone. He seemed completely unaware of the ripple effect his small gesture had started. As the train began to move again, Elon's attention shifted to a man standing near the door. He wore a backpack and looked tired, his clothes slightly worn and his eyes weary. He clutched a small paper bag in his hand, glancing nervously around the car as though trying to decide something. Elon noticed the man's hesitation and wondered what was on his mind. The man finally made a decision. He turned toward the older woman with the groceries and gently tapped her shoulder. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I don't have much, but would you like this? It's a sandwich." He held out the paper bag, his hand trembling slightly. The older woman looked startled at first, then deeply moved. "Oh, that's so kind of you," she said, taking the bag. "But are you sure you don't need it?" The man shook his head. "I already ate," he said with a small smile. "You look like you've had a long day." The older woman's eyes glistened as she accepted the sandwich. "Thank you," she said again, her voice warm and sincere. Elon felt a wave of emotion at the simple exchange. Here was someone who had very little to give but still chose to offer what he could. It reminded him of something his mother had once told him. Generosity wasn't about how much you had, but about how willing you were to share. The energy in the train car had completely shifted. People who had been strangers just moments ago were now interacting, helping each other, and sharing small smiles. It was as though an invisible barrier had been lifted, replaced by a shared sense of connection. Even the businessman, who had seemed so engrossed in his phone earlier, was no longer scrolling. He looked up, watching the scene unfold with a faint look of surprise. He stood up, gestured to a woman standing nearby with a child, and offered his seat. The mother hesitated but eventually sat down, thanking him softly. Elon smiled to himself, feeling a quiet sense of pride. This wasn't just about one person's kindness. It was about how small actions could inspire a whole room to change. The train rolled on, but the atmosphere inside was transformed. It wasn't just a ride anymore. It was a lesson in humanity. The train continued its journey, the rhythmic sound of the tracks beneath them almost soothing in the newly changed atmosphere. The pregnant woman, now comfortably seated, glanced around at the people who had stepped up to help her and the others. Her shoulders seemed lighter, her face more relaxed. She let out a quiet sigh of relief and smiled at the teenager who had given her the bottle of water earlier. "You really didn't have to do that," she said, her voice full of gratitude. The teenager, still a little shy, smiled back and shrugged. "It was nothing," she replied, but her cheeks turned pink with pride. Her friends, who had been laughing and chatting earlier, now sat quietly, looking around at the kindness spreading through the car. Elon watched the scene unfold, his heart warmed by the change in the passengers. He had thought that this small experiment would give him a glimpse into the way people behaved when they thought no one was watching. What he hadn't expected was the impact it would have on him. The simple gestures, like the businessman offering his seat or the man giving away his sandwich, had transformed the entire environment of the train car. As the train slowed to a stop at yet another station, Elon noticed something unexpected. The young boy who had initially nudged his mother to offer the pregnant woman a seat was now watching the people around him with a curious expression. It was as though he had caught on to the fact that he had sparked something, and he was proud of it. Elon decided it was time to reveal himself. He stood up from his seat and walked toward the mother and her son, who were sitting across the aisle. The boy looked up at him, his eyes wide, and for a moment, Elon felt like he was a part of something bigger than himself. "Excuse me," Elon said gently, making sure his voice wasn't too loud. "I just wanted to thank you. Your son's simple act of kindness today made a real difference." The mother blinked, surprised at the attention. She looked up at Elon, realizing who he was. "Wait, are you?" she started, but her words faltered. Elon smiled and nodded. "Yes, I'm Elon Musk." The boy's face lit up with excitement. "You're him? The guy who made all those rockets?" he asked, his voice full of awe. Elon chuckled, feeling a little humbled by the boy's innocent enthusiasm. "That's me. But today, I'm just a guy who watched something amazing happen." He looked at the boy's mother, who seemed both shocked and proud. "I want to thank you both. The way you taught your son about kindness today, it's something that will stay with him for a long time." The boy's mother smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "We just try to do the right thing," she said simply. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "I've set up something special for your son," he said, handing it to her. "A small fund for his education, as a thank you for his kindness today." The mother's eyes widened, and her voice cracked slightly with emotion. That's too much. We didn't do it for anything in return." Elon shook his head. "I know, but sometimes the smallest actions can have a huge impact. He's inspired something in all of us today." As he walked away, Elon looked back one last time at the train car. The mood had shifted entirely from when he first boarded. It was no longer a place of indifference, but one of connection. People had learned something about themselves and each other, all because of a small, simple act of kindness. As the train continued its journey, the energy in the car had completely transformed. What had started as a quiet, crowded space was now filled with warmth and unspoken connections. Passengers who had been strangers only an hour ago were now exchanging glances, smiles, and small acts of kindness. It felt as though the train had become a microcosm of something bigger, a reminder that, despite everything, people could still care for each other. Elon sat back down, his mind racing with thoughts. He had been on trains countless times before, but today was different. He had watched people, not just going through the motions of their day, but truly seeing each other. A simple gesture, like a woman offering her seat or a man giving away a sandwich, had set off a chain reaction of empathy. It was the kind of thing that, on a larger scale, could make the world a better place. But would it? Elon wasn't sure, but for now, he could see the impact it had on this one small train car. The businessman, who had seemed so absorbed in his phone earlier, was now chatting with the older woman who had received the sandwich. They were laughing quietly together, their earlier awkwardness replaced with a sense of shared experience. The man who had helped the pregnant woman with her bag was sitting back down, a content smile on his face, as if he knew that doing the right thing had made him feel better than anything else could. The teenager who had started it all by offering the water bottle had become a quiet observer of the whole scene. Her friends were still whispering excitedly, pointing at the small acts of kindness around them, but she remained thoughtful. Every now and then, she would glance at the pregnant woman, who was now chatting with the boy's mother. The two women shared a look of understanding. A bond formed through their shared experience on this strange and unusual day. Elon smiled to himself, feeling proud of what had happened. It was proof that kindness didn't need to be loud or grand to make a difference. It was the small, simple things, those fleeting moments when people choose to look up from their own world and see someone else, that could change everything. As the train approached the final stop, Elon felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had seen something today that many people might miss: the power of kindness to shift the mood of an entire room. It didn't require wealth or fame, just a willingness to care about others. The people on this train had reminded him of that. As he prepared to get off, Elon glanced around one last time. The passengers had returned to their routines, but something had shifted. The energy in the air was lighter, more connected. It was as though the small kindnesses had brought everyone a little closer together. Elon stepped off the train, his mind still racing with thoughts. He had set out to observe, but he had also learned something. People were capable of incredible kindness when given the chance. The world might be full of distractions, but it only took one person to start something that could grow. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as divided as it seemed. Maybe, just maybe, people still cared.